Hello and welcome to the Society with Fatima Shaheen. Pakistan, a country which might be often misrepresented, that too in the global arena, is definitely a country which has then preferred diplomacy over aggression. And that is something that we have seen very proactively, that too in the recent India-Pakistan conflict. But when we do talk about this issue, that too more so from a social lens, how have we seen this issue impacting the Pakistani society at large? That is something upon which we'll be shedding light today. We'll not only be talking about the very important role of people, of masses, of educators when it comes to putting forward Pakistan's narrative in this regard. What is very important to mention is the extremely pivotal and very important responsibility which was then vested and very proactively exhibited by Pakistani youth, who did in the true sense emerge to be digital cyber warriors in this regard too, doing away with so much of misinformation and disinformation regarding Pakistan and Pakistan's narrative too. In this regard, we'll also be generally talking about the very important role of minorities, of Pakistani artists, especially when it comes to not only promoting cultural diplomacy, but also, yes, ensuring on the contrary that in turbulent times like these, they actually do stand with the nation, and that is something that they've actually done, for which, of course, they do deserve credit. In this regard, we'll also be talking about not one, rather quite a few unanswered questions that are still pending between the two nations, be it the resolution of the long-standing issue of Kashmir, which again, as we all understand, has gained some international attention, or for that matter, the unilateral suspension of the Indus Water Treaty and options that Pakistan there onwards has with regards to India unilaterally putting aside this treaty. All of this today, that too with an extremely eminent panel. Let me introduce you to my today's panel. My first panelist for today's show is Barrister Taimoor Malik, who is an expert on international law. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to the show. Thank you for joining us. Alongside him, I have Ms. Fakhra Shahid. She is a senior educationist. Assalamu alaikum ji, and welcome to the show. Thank you for joining us. And my third panelist for today's show is Ms. Chaudhry. She is a women rights and minority rights activist, alongside being a human rights defender. Assalamu alaikum, madam, and welcome to the show. Thank you for joining us. Now, before we start the discussion on today's topic, let's have a look at this brief report.
Pakistan's vision for peace is rooted in dignity, coexistence, and legal principle. Experts on show highlighted how our peace narrative and right to self-defense align with international legal standards. Youth voices championed digital solidarity as our frontline against global misinformation, showing the power of unity in the digital age. Educationists called for peace-focused reforms, promoting emotional intelligence and civic empathy in our schools. Minority rights advocates celebrated initiatives like the CM Minority Card and the Minority Rights Bill, powerful steps towards true inclusion. From the interfaith spirit of Kartarpur to youth-led peace building, the nation's path forward is clear. The message is powerful and unwavering. True patriotism lies not in retaliation, but in resilience, reason, and mutual respect. Pakistan stands tall as a symbol of harmony, empowered youth, and a committed to peace.
Welcome back from the report. Sir, I would like to start the conversation with you. And to start off, one thing that I would want to quote is that they say that, people rise above hate only when nations rise towards peace. And when we do talk about this, especially with reference to Pakistan, we all know that yes, Pakistan and Pakistanis particularly, we are a very peace-loving nation. But in the context of the recent India-Pakistan conflict, we have seen that Pakistan has been subjected to not one, rather quite a few international law violations. But talking about this with reference to the way India has acted in ways more than one, as an international lawyer and of course an expert in this area, how would you then comment, rather bifurcate on the various violations that number one, India has committed, and number two, on the options that Pakistan does have so as to take a legal course?
Thank you, Fatima, for having me on the show. People like me have been saying in recent years that this is the age of lawfare and not warfare. However, India, to its own detriment, has proven us wrong by taking such unilateral military actions, acts of aggression and acts of war that we've all seen transpire during the last 10-12 days. What India did was to weaponize a tragic incident that took place in the Indian-occupied Jammu and Kashmir, illegally Indian occupied Jammu and Kashmir and use it without evidence as an accusation against Pakistan or Pakistan-based groups.
Right.
And used it to unilaterally undertake an act of war against Pakistan. On the other hand, Pakistan showed considerable restraint.
True.
And offered independent investigation of the event. Offered to India that we are willing to cooperate. If you have any evidence, please bring it forth to not just us, to the world community, and we'll cooperate with you in identifying any culprits that may be within the territory of Pakistan.
Right.
However, that was not done. So what India did was in breach of the UN Charter. It was in breach of laws of war, in breach of international humanitarian law, of which ICRC is the guardian globally. What India did was not attack any military installation in the first sequence of events. It attacked places of worship. It attacked mosques in
Civilians
Pakistan.
Too.
That resulted in the death of more than 30 civilians,
right? Children,
multiple children,
women, sir.
In different locations. So whichever way you look at it, it's been a breach, of course, of various international laws. It's been a violation of the basic norms of humanity that exist.
Indeed, that's very rightly put by yourself, sir. But in addition to that, I think something that we must focus upon, that too in this regard, is this entire notion of education. Now, we do know that there are so many talks, there are so many conversations which are talking about this issue purely from a political or from a security viewpoint, which is very important. But something I feel missing here is that educationist narrative here. Now, when we do talk about conflicts like these, I think it's very important for us to talk about this with regards to perhaps also looking at our education system. We have seen intellectuals, we have seen educators like yourself, the society at large, of course, defending Pakistan and putting Pakistan's narrative forward. But when we talk about this with reference to perhaps educating young children, madam, do you not feel that perhaps our textbooks and the way history is taught to young children, that is also something that perhaps needs to be revisited, especially when it comes to having a more peace-oriented, a conflict resolution-related narrative, that too with regards to dealing with such conflicts, because this again is something which, God forbid, can happen again. So there needs to be a permanent change. It shouldn't be something very temporary in its nature.
Agreed. Thank you so much for this very pertinent question. And you're very right. The purpose of education is to prepare students for a world that they're existing in. And in a world that is torn apart by conflict, it's absolutely necessary that we move just beyond the academics and also look at peace education, at conflict resolution, and making our students really citizens of the current world in their understanding of their place. How is that, what's happening around them, and how do they interpret and read that? So what is absolutely necessary at this point in time is to incorporate in the curriculum conflict resolution, global citizenship, and aspects of emotional intelligence as well.
Perhaps also by that virtue, greater representation of more, global peace leaders like Nelson Mandela, like even if we talk about this locally, I think Abdul Sattar Eidi and so many other iconic figures too. But do you not feel that here perhaps revamping the curriculum would be the first step? What about having the right environment? What about actually training our teachers to ensure that, yes, when it comes to children, they have that mindset which is more leaning towards dialogue as opposed to conflict?
Exactly. You're very right. You see, the thing is that the curriculum is lived in the classroom. So who is the person who is creating that environment in the classroom? If our classrooms are not safe spaces, if our classrooms are not inclusive spaces, how are we then developing them as tolerant, compassionate, and responsible citizens of the world? One of the questions I would just like to highlight over here: how many times do we stop and ask ourselves that are the teachers aware of the fact that there are different cultural, linguistic, religious diversity in the classroom, and how are they kind of playing it in a manner to encourage students to understand that there are peaceful ways of looking at situations, and false bravado is not the way. So I think what is absolutely necessary is that teachers are trained in pedagogies and strategies that help them manage their classrooms more effectively and make them places of safe and secure interactions and relationship building.
Right, and that is something that should ideally be a very long-term and sustainable effort. I'll come towards you. I think, Madam, here what's very important to talk about is the very important role of minorities too. Now, we've seen historically that whether it was a formation of a very beloved country or there onwards, minorities in Pakistan, they have played a very important role when it comes to its national development. And more particularly, we've also seen that in this recent India-Pakistan conflict, we did see so many Hindus, so many other people from, belonging to different religions actually coming forward and advocating for Pakistan, that too in online spaces. But this again, do you not feel is something that needs to be perhaps something which is more permanent in its nature? How can we as a nation ensure that yes, we actually include minorities, whether it is by way of policies or it is by way of initiatives when it comes to their true, representation, their true inclusion in the Pakistani society?
Fatima, the first thing I would like to say is that as far as me being a minority, from the religious minority community, the religious minorities have always played their role from the very beginning, from the very onset, whether it was in the creation of Pakistan, whether it was in the development of Pakistan, the welfare, development, defense, the armed forces, the minorities. You see religious minorities on the forefront playing their role as Pakistani citizens. I think what is important is that to accept them as Pakistani citizens. They're not any, the religious minorities, that otherization has to end. We are as much as we are as much Pakistanis as anybody else. So having said that, yes, I've seen also a lot of young people taking to social media to express their allegiance to the armed forces and to Pakistan, but that is nothing new. We have pledged our allegiance to this country the way everybody else has pledged it.
Right.
It's the role of it has to be the other way now. There need to be more inclusive initiatives taken by the government.
In addition to that, I also feel there needs to be greater inclusive representation of minorities, that too in Pakistani media. I'll come towards you, sir, and I would want you to add to what she just said. Now, we do know that young people in Pakistan have played a very important role, especially when it comes to combating fake news, misinformation and disinformation again. But how would you comment on this, looking at this perhaps from the viewpoint that yes, this was something that was extremely important, that too in the face of so much hate, from aggression on the other side. And this again is something that perhaps we need to work on something long term too, because young people as it is, they are Pakistan's, asset. And young people as it is, those I feel are the biggest ambassadors of Pakistan world over. So how would you comment on young people's role, that too in such trying times like these?
So this conflict has been a multi-domain, multi-dimensional conflict. It wasn't limited to airstrikes or ground movements, but a lot of it was played in the sphere of the online world. And that's where the young people, especially on the Pakistani side, played a very important role in countering false narratives, in talking about peace. Pakistan, I think we should congratulate the young people in the country for the humor and wit they displayed.
Of course, in terms of the memes.
Even in these trying times. So I think we have done something right. Our educationists have done something right with this previous generation, that there was very little warmongering on our side. There were calls of defending Pakistan's honor and territorial sovereignty, which should have been the case.
Of course.
But at the same time, when the ceasefire was announced, I think Pakistani side showed unity in welcoming the ceasefire and showing that we are a peace-loving country.
Right, and I also remember, sir, that the governor of KPK, he particularly gave a very young activist a reward for countering misinformation. So these are things which need to be actually advocated and highlighted too. But sir, coming back, I think taking advantage of the fact that you are an expert in international law, I think there are still so many things that we are not talking about which perhaps will come forward in the upcoming days too. And that would then involve, of course, holding India accountable for issues more than one. When we do talk about the suspension of the Indus Water Treaty, I would want you to focus on that particularly. Now we do know that what India has done is clearly not called for. It is illegal. It is, of course, something that they don't get any, legitimacy when we look at the treaty itself. But what options does Pakistan now have, given, of course, the fact that Pakistan has approached the United Nations Security Council, and then World Bank, as we understand, has the limited role of being a facilitator. So what more can Pakistan do so as to tackle, of course, this unilateral suspension?
The world has been saying that the future wars will be water wars. And the Indus Water Treaty and its compliance is not just important for people who are here on your show today, but in fact it's important for the society and the youth of the country. Because what India is trying to achieve is not something they can achieve in the next 12 months, but that's something that they've shown the intention to now undertake over the coming decades perhaps. So Indus Water Treaty does not have any mechanism for suspension or termination of the treaty,
right?
Especially suspension. And therefore we'll stop cooperation with Pakistan in terms of sharing of water-related data in relation to flooding situation updates, in relation to, and we'll build dams to prevent water flow to whatever extent possible to Pakistan. Now, these, from a Pakistani point of view, water is the source of so many, to somebody like me, it's a right to life issue.
Of course.
It's not, water is no longer something that we need for agriculture or for other reasons, but it's actually a right to life issue for a country like Pakistan.
Internationally, sir, if you do look at this from a very holistic viewpoint, treaties which then relate with water particularly, they have been given so much importance as a general principle of international law too, and even when it comes to our constitution, it is included within our right to life as well. So all the more reason that when it comes to Pakistan pursuing its various legal options, what would those viable legal options be? Because again, we understand that there's so much room for debate here.
So one thing is under the Indus Water Treaty. Of course, the World Bank has the capacity of a facilitator and can nominate neutral experts. There is a dispute resolution mechanism given under the Indus Water Treaty, and we've gone through it in previous times as well with India. In addition to that, because it's a right of life issue, and any stoppage of water is going to be treated as an act of war and act of aggression by Pakistan, which legally will give us the right to self-defense.
Right.
If our right to life is being restricted by an enemy country, so if we look at it in a very holistic manner, then we are not just limited to Indus Water Treaty and its dispute resolution mechanism, but rather we are looking at options available to us under the UN Charter, or options of approaching the United Nations Security Council,
right.
Approaching the UN and
maybe the ICJ as well,
seeking an advisory opinion.
Right.
It has persuasive value at times, but we can form global legal opinion and global diplomatic opinion in relation to our legal position on the Indus Water Treaty, and then that should really compel India to take corrective measures. You see, even trade these days is linked to legal issues.
Of course.
So European Union keeps talking about a GSP plus status being attached to human rights standards in certain countries. Child labor related legal violations can result in limitations
even
of trade.
Sanctions can
absolutely, and
right.
sanctions. So this is something really major. If an upper riparian country, which is India, tries to create a right to life issue for a lower riparian country like Pakistan, of course, then that should really result in a lot of legal issues,
right. And also,
but
sir,
we have to look in a very holistic manner.
That's very rightly put, Sir, and also it would set a very dangerous precedent then. So it would involve, of course, not only Pakistan pursuing its not one, rather various legal options, but also looking at this diplomatically and perhaps seeing, our strategic alliances in this way as
Absolutely.
well. I'll come towards you, madam. I think here what's very important to talk about is the right to education. Now, we do know that whenever it comes to conflict, unfortunately, children's right to education is something which might be, impacted. And here we did see that because of this ongoing issue, the schools were closed, then some examinations, they were also delayed. And then we also know that when it comes to, of course, sensitive regions like Kashmir particularly, that is something that has been happening there for the longest time. So how do you as an educationist then propose, can we go go about changing parental perceptions about ensuring that children's right to education is something which is left unhampered, that too during, times of such conflict?
Yes, parental child safety is the priority for schools and for parents as well. But having said that, more than parental perceptions, we should now should be looking at the problem of disruption in education, which is becoming a reality. So there might be natural causes for that, natural disasters or such conflicts that might disrupt education. So what we need to be looking at is how can we ensure that there is continuity in education and what kind of education. So having said that, the first part of this the solution is to now look at ways of enabling distance education, providing radio education, using technology to reach out to those areas and those students, and also finding ways and resources so that there is a sense and semblance of some form of normalcy in their life.
Right.
And the second part of that is that we need to be now looking at what kind of education should be provided. Although basic literacy and numeracy needs to be ensured, but we also have to understand that in times of crisis, there's a lot of trauma that these children go through, and even if they're not directly experiencing that, the very air and environment of urgency and
of forced migration too, people end up losing their homes. There's so much loss of cultural heritage too, and these are very real issues.
These are very real, and for a child to make sense of that, it's absolutely necessary that the programs that are offered in these areas are focusing on aspects of psychosocial education and support that needs to be provided. So it is important that there are teachers and there are people who are trained in that, and they provide that support to families who are then able to kind of support their children and make them come through this crisis situation.
Right, madam. I'll come towards you. I think here we must also talk about your minorities and the milestones that Pakistan has achieved when it comes to upholding rights of minorities too. Particularly, I would want to mention, the passing of the National Commission for Minorities Bill 2025, which, as we all understand, is a milestone because it has come after a lot of hard work, and I know you for a fact have been working on this particularly too. So why would you deem it to be such a big historic win, that too with regards to upholding minority rights in Pakistan, and how would you then analyze it to perhaps be that step in the right direction when it comes to better compliance with our international human rights commitments, especially with regards to minority rights?
Fatima, like you just said, we have been working on the establishment of this commission for a very long time. In 2014, it was the then Chief Justice, the Sadaq Hussain Jilani's judgment, which was basically on the protection of religious minorities in Pakistan, and one of the components of that judgment was the formation of the Minorities Commission. So yes, we are looking at it as a very positive move. We wanted a commission. The commission that we have been lobbying and demanding was a powerful commission, which is established through an act of parliament, which would have the authority and the independence to uphold the rights of religious minorities in Pakistan, which we are hoping and looking forward to this commission doing.
Right.
To uphold the rights of religious minorities, to take notice of the violation of human rights that happen, and to then take action on those measures.
Right.
So, of
but
course,
stress still needs to be placed on the working of the commission.
Exactly.
And how transparent will that actually be to hold people accountable?
Yes. We need to look now how it is set up, the transparency, the implementation, how it upholds Pakistan's international commitments. So all that is yet to be seen. I think it's too early to comment on how the commission will be functioning, but the mere fact that it has been approved is definitely a historic
it's a step in the right direction, right?
Yes,
right,
of course.
Madam. But in addition to that, I think we must also talk about, not one, rather quite a few initiatives taken by the Pakistani government. In this regard, particularly, I would want to talk about the launching of Pakistan's first CM minority card by the Punjab government, which is aimed particularly at, supporting minorities, more particularly underprivileged minority families, by giving them certain amounts of money. Having said that, we have seen that even in the past, past there have been not one, rather quite a few initiatives which aim to actually uplift the downtrodden segments of the Pakistani society. But looking at this perhaps from a more, again, holistic viewpoint, do you not feel as a human rights defender that we also need greater laws, more policies when it comes to social inclusion of minorities, that too in the true sense?
Yes, the minority card would certainly help in providing some kind of welfare, some kind of support to the extremely marginalized and downtrodden societies. I think with 50,000, there are about 50,000 families that were initiated in the initial part of this program were selected, and now I think they will select some more. But that is fine. That we look at it. It's a good way to help the marginalized communities. But like you said, we need to bring in more policies that would mainstream religious minorities, bring them into the, more opportunities for religious minorities, the implementation of our constitutional guarantees. Religious minorities have in the past played a very crucial role in the development, and as I said earlier, in the creation and development of the country. We need to bring our youth, non-Muslim young people into mainstream, and programs need to be initiated by all stakeholders to sort of develop that sense of trust and to reinforce that sense of trust.
Right. So I think all in all what you do mean to say is that number one, we need to work on legal enforcement.
Absolutely.
And number two, of course, by that virtue, perhaps work towards greater education and awareness too. Now, a lot of times we do know that initiatives like these or even progressive laws might be passed, but people might not just know about them.
Exactly.
Sir, coming towards you, I think here we must talk about, of course, the long-standing issue of Kashmir as it is too. Now, looking at this entire issue and, given, of course, the fact that it has, again, of course, gotten attention not only internationally but nationally too, because this remains to be that one issue which is still pending and, of course, outstanding between the two countries. How do you feel can we go about resolving this issue finally, that too in a very legal way? And number two, when we do talk about this, how do you also propose can we go about actually holding India accountable, that too with regards to the various human rights violations that India has been committing in Kashmir for the longest time ever?
So to India's dismay, President Trump's ceasefire announcement specifically mentioned Kashmir.
Right.
And his subsequent announcements or references to this mediation have also mentioned the long-standing issue of Kashmir.
Right.
And Pakistan has always believed that Kashmir is an international issue and it needs to be resolved in line with the United Nations Security Councils, which effectively call for the right of self-determination of the Kashmiri people. India has tried to bilateralize the issue and obviously with the abrogation of Article 370 of the Indian Constitution and other steps that India has taken, it has unilaterally tried to change the demographics of the Indian legally occupied Jammu and Kashmir. So Pakistan, I think, has an opportunity now, and the people of Kashmir have an opportunity where the Kashmir issue is again in the spotlight of the world community. What needs to be done is that there is already a legal way forward in relation to this, which is implement the UNSC resolutions in relation to Kashmir, right? Before the demographic change gets implemented in India with more non-Kashmiris settling in, buying properties, becoming voters in IIOJK, a referendum needs to be held. Right? Pakistan has never said, unlike India, that Kashmir, the entirety of it, is an integral part of Pakistan. We've said that we would like it to be, but we would respect the choice of the Kashmiri people themselves. It's their right to decide what they want to do.
Right.
So, and I think the world community understands that. There needs to be diplomatic and international legal pressure on India to do that.
Right.
India, we should not let the world forget what India did with the use of pellet guns in IIOJK, the disappearances, the abductions.
So this again is a very important issue, because we have been talking about all these human rights violations for the longest time ever. But then again, how can India be held accountable for the same? Can we take India to the international ICJ for this particularly, or is there any other forum based on which, of course, India should be held responsible for all these human rights violations. So how would you look at it from a human rights perspective?
So you see, what Indian armed forces have done in Kashmir is also in breach and in violation of the Rome Statute. India is not a party to the Rome Statute, which created the International Criminal Court. But as we have seen in recent times, International Criminal Court has sort of exercised jurisdiction, or at least given opinions in relation to where there have been war crimes. What India did in Pakistan with the airstrikes damaging mosques and killing civilians was a war crime.
Right.
What India has been doing in Kashmir, because it's an international disputed territory, are war crimes. This needs, like the Indus Water Treaty, a more holistic approach.
Right.
We need to attack where it will hurt India the most.
Right.
As President Trump has been saying, that he used trade to mediate the dispute, this conflict between India and Pakistan. He used the trade leverage. European Union has been doing it in the past as well. So Pakistan and the world community needs to say to India that, look, you might have been shining and bright and whatnot. You rely on world in trade, especially in the technology sector and so on, with the rest of the world. That's not going to happen if you commit war crimes in IIOJK, if you don't give them the right of self-determination. That's where we really need to put our efforts now.
Right.
ICJ doesn't have its own army.
Of course.
Right? There has been a very
But
clear...
I think, Sir, do you not feel that perhaps a combination of both would be more effective? Legal
Absolutely.
action along with strategic alliances,
Absolutely.
along with then of course diplomatic pressure.
pressures.
Because it has to be, I think we have to fight our case against India at all fronts only for it to be successful.
It's a multi-domain thing.
It's a multi-pronged
right? So,
approach and a
absolutely.
multi-domain thing. I'll come towards you. I think here we must talk about, I think, the role of media, and that is something upon which I think both of them also briefly touched upon. Now we have seen that media in times like these is extremely important, more particularly because at the end of the day, at least now it will be, a war of narratives, that too from both the sides. But how important do you feel is media literacy in times like these? Now we have seen that in countries like Finland, their national curriculum is such that it actually teaches children, that too up to a primary school level, how exactly to distinguish between something that is right, that is verifiable, and something which is completely fake. So do you not feel then that when it comes to revamp of our education system, these are issues perhaps that we need to prioritize?
Absolutely, Fatima. Because in this digital age where there's fake information, misinformation, propaganda, it is absolutely necessary that we develop in our students the ability to critically question sources, to also assess credibility, and then identify biases. So how would that happen? It is important that media literacy becomes very much the part of the curriculum and teaching in the schools, starting from primary levels, because that's where the information is coming to them in different ways, from what they're listening to, what they're reading, to what they're watching. So media literacy has now become a common practice and a subject. It can be a subject, it can be an approach through which other cross-curricular links can be established to that. For instance, in language arts, when they can look at news in the Urdu newspapers and in the English newspapers, and then match it with what further fact-finding that needs to happen. That as is, UNESCO has already in its agenda for media and media literacy has highlighted the need for schools to prioritize this.
Right.
So media literacy is absolutely necessary if we are to cultivate and nurture students and children and future citizens of the world who are aware of the global perspectives, as well as very, very responsible and informed about what's happening, and take a very informed stance and position.
Of course, journalists are in that position of power. If anybody happens to circulate something which is not correct, then of course it does have a very detrimental impact. I'll come towards you. And I think here what's very important to talk about is the Kartarpur corridor, which, as we all understand, has been a very powerful symbol of interfaith harmony and religious tourism. But as a minority rights member yourself, what more, in your opinion, needs to be done when it comes to scaling up initiatives like these so as to project Pakistan to be a more peace-loving and a tolerant state, that too with regards to minority rights? So what would your suggestions be in this regard? Do you feel that perhaps by having more of interfaith peace festivals, that would be an appropriate way forward?
Yes, absolutely. Kartarpur corridor, of course, is a symbol of interfaith harmony, of regional diplomacy, and I think such initiatives should certainly be taken. There we have so many historic and religiously significant heritage sites which need to be uplifted and not recreated, but sort of reconstructed and uplifted. And of course, this can bring Pakistan back onto its pluralistic history that we have had. So it sort of includes diversity, it enhances the diversity, the inclusivity of the country, and certainly Kartarpur and other initiatives like the Kartarpur corridor would certainly be a very, very positive thing. And what you said about the peace festivals, that is one such initiative, but we need to include society at every level, at children, adults, youth, into these initiatives in order to create a peaceful coexistence.
I do remember, I think we've spoken about this before as well, Ms. Fakhra. Education institutions have been taking a lead in this, especially when it comes to special occasions like Eid. But I feel that these again need to be done at perhaps more of a mass level, so as to involve everybody in the society.
And on a mass level, and involve all religious communities together. You see, you have to bring them together. You want to create a peaceful coexistence, they have to be able to understand and accept each other, respect the other person's religion, and that can only happen through initiatives where they're all brought together and made aware of these conditions and these issues.
Right.
So absolutely, there's a lot that can be done.
Made aware, and of course, actually taught to embrace the differences, because I think strength is something that actually emanates from diversity per se.
Yes.
I'll come towards you, sir, and moving towards the end of the show. So, to wrap up today's conversation and, of course, reiterating the fact that Pakistan is a peace-loving country. It is a country that believes in tolerance and interfaith harmony, and of course is actively working when it comes to upholding constitutional rights and guarantees of all segments of the Pakistani society. So what do you feel are the societal attitudes that we as a society perhaps need to change when it comes to prioritizing peace over pride, that too particularly in our younger generation?
I think that we are headed in the right direction. If anything, perhaps to the surprise of many, the way our youth came together during this time of crisis was an eye-opener. And if the educational institutes play a more positive role, and our textbooks and our education mediums are sort of more peace-oriented, this will of course only improve. The fact-checking that took place in relation to fake news during this conflict by the Pakistani youth was very promising and surprising. So I think we are headed in the right direction. We celebrated the role of minorities in this conflict on the Pakistani side. We celebrated the role of women in this as well. You saw that the one female pilot who was perhaps shown in the photo of yesterday was celebrated on social media.
Right.
So that shows the attitude of the society, how positive it is, and we look forward to such positive news.
And we've also seen a lot of artists from the media, even celebrities coming forward and advocating for Pakistan's narrative. I think in ways more than one. I think this conflict is something which has unified us, that too as a society. Coming towards you and moving towards the end of the show, I think here what's very important to talk about is the need for us to perhaps prioritize academic diplomacy the way we have, prioritized and worked upon perhaps sports diplomacy, and we've also seen other countries work on cultural exchange in that regard too. So as a senior educationist, do you not feel that when it comes to resolving conflict, when it comes to softening perceptions, perhaps academic diplomacy is something that we do need to work upon, and that too perhaps with regards to having more of youth cultural exchange exchange programs, that too at least to the extent of SAARC countries. So how would you comment on that, madam?
Yes, I'll build on to what Ms. Michelle was saying and link it to what Mr. Taimoor just mentioned. You see, we need to see it holistically. It cannot be we have an event for peace and then forget about it. It needs to be continuous discourse, a continuous representation, as well as an effort, conscious effort of integrating all efforts together. So when we're talking about academic diplomacy, it is important that we are developing thought leaders of tomorrow, peace leaders of tomorrow. So how would that happen? That would happen when we are not teaching them what, but we are making them thinking about the situation, and then us engaging them in a kind of work that will lead to activism, that would lead to them coming up with a very logical, rational voice. And how would that happen? Now, opportunities like MUNs, Model United Nations, are one such ways in which university students, even school-going students, understand how does international diplomacy work, how are peace efforts negotiated. And also within that, opportunities for collaboration and regional negotiation. You see, we have to see the commonalities that are there. And when we do that, that's when real peace and tolerance and harmony comes in. So opportunities for research on the social issues or other common issues within the region, and that student exchange can happen.
Student exchange program is extremely important, especially when it comes to the SAARC countries. And we have seen quite a few happening, that too, you know, at a very big scale.
And intercultural and interfaith, as you've already mentioned, those are the kind of engagements and collaborations that need to be happening more as a way of doing things, and not just an event that happens.
Right. Yeah. Again, so this has to be a long-term sustainable.
It has to be a long-term.
I'll come towards you, Ms. Michelle, and coming towards the end of the show. So my last question to you would be that given the fact that you have been a very active human rights defender and that you have dedicated your entire career working to protect, rather empower minority rights, what is that one message that you would want to give to the audience out there, more particularly the international community, when it comes to Pakistan and Pakistani community upholding not only minority rights, but ensuring that yes, they are given safe spaces, they are empowered in the true sense, and Pakistan is that one society, it is that one nation which then ensures not only social but economic inclusion of minorities in ways more than one too.
For any society, for any nation, it is important that you empower, that you make the people aware of what their rights are, where they stand as citizens of a certain country. Religious minorities in Pakistan will and continue to give their all for the betterment of this country. We have and we will continue to. And I would just like to say that it's a give and take. It's a two-way. Again, I would say it's a two-way path.
It's a two-way social contract.
Exactly. Where the government has to play, or the stakeholders have to play their role, and the citizens have their role to play. Every single person, every one of us have our role to play and contribute positively towards the welfare and betterment of Pakistan, and we will continue to do that. And my message to the youth would also be that at times we need to go above all these differences and sort of create bridges and create, stand as a united front. Basically. And that is what is very important. It is Pakistan. We are Pakistanis before we are anything else.
That's so true.
So I have been raised with this patriotism that Pakistan takes priority over everything else.
Of course.
So my message to all people out there is that is what we have to follow. Pakistan takes priority, and the betterment and welfare and development lies entirely with its people.
Right, madam, your point is noted. On which note I would like to conclude today's show. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much, Ms. Fakhra, and thank you so much, madam, for your time today. Well, to conclude today's show, we spoke about the social impact of the India-Pakistan conflict, that too on the masses at large. In this regard, it goes without saying that we've seen intellectuals, we've seen educators play a very important role when it comes to actually, making that distinction between information that has been accurate and a of course information that has not been so accurate. In this regard, what is very important to then highlight and of course appreciate has been the very important role of young people in Pakistan, who've actually been at the forefront when it comes to doing away with so much misinformation, which actually had that capability of undermining Pakistan's narrative, that too to the world. In times like these, something that we do need to focus upon is definitely media literacy. We need to educate people, we need to empower people so as to make that distinction between information, which is accurate and information which on the contrary is just merely fake news. That's it for tonight. Thank you for watching The Society. Until next time, take care and Allah Hafiz.